For SB 375 to be a success, there are numerous hurdles that need to be addressed. The bill places more of a burden on regional planning bodies, so issues of coordination between local and regional government will need to be worked out. Budget shortfalls mean local governments do not have the resources and staff to do long-term planning. There are also questions about streamlining CEQA requirements. Traditionally, regional planning agencies have not been involved in local land use decisions, but this bill encourages more cooperation. While it does not explicitly mandate local land use or development intensity, the bill provides incentives for them to comply with regional plans and directives.
But the planning that's often done here has nothing to do with political boundaries. It has to do with transportation or commute sheds. It has to do with the economic generation that might be clearly defined within a regional boundary. It has to deal with air quality and how certain pollutants are assigned. And yet the legislation is not geared toward those regions, toward that regional definition.
Historically, the leadership has tended to come not from Los Angeles or other areas closer to the urban core, but instead the leadership has tended to come from mayors and city councils from smaller cities or from the less urbanized counties within the region.
Given the financial difficulties faced by local jurisdictions, the capacity for planning has been reduced, and more resources will be needed to implement SB 375's targeted land use changes.
So this issue of being able to be responsive and involved in this piece of legislation is not only in terms of just having bodies to respond to it, but also our ability to send staff members to training, to workshops like this, to simply be educated and involved in the process of finding out how other communities are dealing with these issues.
Money always comes up, and I think if you're planners or you're following planning particularly, you know that most city and county planning departments have become fee-based over the years. And so as the housing slowdown has occurred in the last few months, gosh, it seems like centuries, doesn't it? People are reducing the size of their planning departments dramatically, which makes them less able to deal with these issues.
To encourage more compact land use patterns, SB 375 aims to make CEQA requirements less onerous for developers of infill projects.
The real costs of infill are the CEQA requirements and the 5 years of entitlements. That's the real cost. The physical infrastructure actually pales in comparison to the cost of money over that period of time. And that's how dysfunctional CEQA has become a tool of NIMBYs. And they use it to drag out the entitlement process to the point where most developers I know, they say it's too expensive to do infill, but that's because it takes too long.
Most developers will say that CEQA is one of the toughest things they have to deal with in the state. It's always a sensitive issue. I don't think where SB 375 is at right now is likely where things will end.
In addition, there are other obstacles to infill that need to be addressed.
The rules for infill infrastructure are not very good. They tend always to favor greenfield development. So we might want to densify housing around transit stations if in fact you have populations that justify transit to begin with. But how do you improve the schools? And what do you do about the safety and the other kinds of things that support people living in more dense environments? And that's a whole system of things which arguably lead to greater sustainability, but are not part of the calculation and certainly aren't part of the funding or resources that are being made available to local government.
None of this involves a forcing of properties to redevelop. It's strictly a matter of incentives. If you upzone the property and you improve the street in front, then some property owners will choose to redevelop. But none of it is about eminent domain. It's just rezoning and infrastructure investments.
If you want to do an infill project in a center city and you have to expand the size of the sewer, you can't do a Melrose district quite so easily because you have lots more property owners who have to vote to tax themselves, and that isn't so successful. And you certainly can't put the burden of expanding the sewer pipe for the whole neighborhood on just the incremental new development. So there are a number of things that we have to think about in terms of how we support the structure and the rules and the financing and so on to make infill more achievable.